Hi, everybody. I'm going to take a sip of water before I get started. The clicker. All right. Well, I didn't expect this many people, honestly, but GPA filled the house, so I'm happy to have you guys here. So when Pastor Mike and Adonia asked me to give this message, what came to mind was let go and let God. This has been a mantra I've been using for the past few years, and it was hard won, let me tell you, and it's something I'm still working on. But it was an integral part to my journey to find my husband, Chris, but also to overcome the most difficult time in my life. So you don't know somebody's story until, the stranger's sitting next to you, until you ask them or they tell you. So this is a little bit of my journey. So a little bit of background about me, because I know I only moved to this community about a year ago, but this picture was taken actually on the white sandy beaches of Ivory Coast, which is in West Africa. So that's me in the little polka dot dress. I'm very cute. And so I was actually born in the country of Liberia, which is right next door to there in West Africa, and my parents were missionaries who were proselytizing, spreading the word of the Unification Church at the time. My mom was a missionary for 19 years. My dad joined her later when they got married. And just a funny little story. So when we moved to the US, actually, I wrote on a standardized test. I was maybe in the first or second grade that I was African American because I didn't know any better. I didn't know what race was, and I got a little talking to by the teacher. I was like, well, it doesn't mean, I don't know, that's what I am. I come from Africa. So, cute little 5-year-old me. So we moved to the US actually when I was about 3 because of civil war. So we were ripped from our homes with nothing and had to start all over. My dad's American, my mom's German. So she'd never she had stepped foot in America, but never lived there. So yeah, that was an abrupt transition in our life very early on. I don't remember my time in Africa, but I'm sure it had an impact on me. And these are my siblings. Actually, my sister's here today, who she introduced herself. She's the eldest. And so we spent about 18 years or so in South Carolina, in the Southeast. I don't know if anybody else here is from the South. I don't think so, but so we lived a pretty normal, I'd say, suburban life. We had lots of neighborhood friends and good schools. I got my degree in communications actually from the local university there. And so at the time, any family, we have our disagreements, but I'd say we're overall very supportive and loving towards each other. You can see my older brother in the middle. He has one arm and lives in Holland with his wife and 2 kids. And then my little brother and his wife live in the Southeast as well. So just a bit of background on me and my family. So I would have said when I was 18, and I'm sure some of you can relate, that I had a pretty solid life of faith. I didn't date, I didn't do drugs, I was a pretty straight-laced student, good student, I didn't go to parties, I had pretty normal friends. But we didn't grow up near a church community, so church to me was family. We did pledge every Sunday, and I always felt free to ask questions and explore my faith. And I know that wasn't the case for everybody who grew up in this church. And so I didn't actually have close friendships in the wider unificationist faith community until I was in my 20s and moved overseas. But I would say at that time, I thought I had a pretty close personal relationship with God, and it wasn't based on what the community told me to be or what my friends, told me how I should act. So I feel really grateful for that time growing up in a family that let me be free to explore who I was. So, getting to the main topic, control. This has been an overarching dominant word in my life. And I had a real hard time letting go and letting God. And so while I felt like I had this personal relationship with God, I felt this overwhelming need to control people and situations and really had a hard time kind of letting go of that and seeing how God was really working in my life. Because, as Pastor Mike and Adonia have shared so many times, you have to let some surrender come into your life, right? When God's speaking to you and not resist it. So I found that extremely difficult. And I'm sure my siblings can tell you, I've been accused of being a perfectionist, of being a control freak, of all those things. And I'm sure I didn't make their lives super easy at times. I was definitely that kid who refused to get in the car when I didn't want to and would kick and scream and you have to drag me in. Anyway, there's a lot of road trips I think that weren't super fun for everybody. But during a gap year in Holland, so similar to GPA is like a faith-based gap year where you're supposed to explore and strengthen your faith along with your peers. So I did that in Holland, actually, for 1 year, and I lived with about 10 other peers of the Unificationist faith. And did they soften my edges, because it was like rocks hitting against each other sometimes. But I put a lot more trust in God during that time, and my goal during that year was to become more balanced. That's it. And then I kind of put it aside, and by the end of the year I realized, oh wow, I feel more at peace, I feel more bright-eyed, and I'd had a renewed sense of faith. And I trusted God to lead me in my relationships with people and be more present, and trying, as always, lessons take a long time to learn, but trying to be more present with people. So when it came the time for me to consider going to the matching. So if you don't know what the matching is, it's the matchmaking process in our church. It's an intentional courting process, kind of traditional courtship, where you get to know each other over a period of time with the intention of marriage. You might not marry that person, but that's how you're engaging with each other and talking. So I thought I knew what I wanted. Don't we all when we're 18, 19, right? I don't know if you can relate. And I thought God had answered my prayers to the T, exactly how I wished. So I wasn't always married to my current husband, Chris. I was actually married before. I met my former husband when I was 18. He was introduced to me by my parents. He was from Africa. And he seemed perfect on paper. He was well-spoken, very handsome, charismatic, and I thought that's exactly what I wanted, because I was kind of shy, self-doubting, and I couldn't believe this guy liked me. And we got to know each other for about 1.5 years, long distance. He was in West Africa and then in France, and then I was studying in the States before we decided to go to the marriage blessing, which is our church's main sacrament. So it's where you dedicate your marriage to God, but also to your family and your community alongside your peers. So long story short, that relationship, I experienced that marriage as psychologically and emotionally abusive. And I moved my life and put my career on hold to join him in France for several years after I finished my undergraduate degree. But actually in doing so, in moving, I'd isolated myself from my family and from people I could talk to about what I was going through, and I found myself feeling gagged and alone during those several years. I didn't even know how to talk to God. How I said, I thought I had a personal relationship with God. I had no idea how to share what I was going through except to ask, can I be more loving? Can I be more supportive? Can I be more unconditional? And my life during that time often felt like walking on eggshells around my husband's emotions. And it was very high conflict. And I am super uncomfortable with conflict, even today. I try to avoid it at all costs if possible. And when I was finally considering, after several years, I was there for about 5 years in France. I'd learned the language, I had a good job, or decent job. I had made friends, I'd made a life there. And the prospect of ending that relationship was terrifying for me. I was terrified about my future. Because when you accept the marriage blessing, you believe it's eternal, or at least I did. I thought that relationship would last forever. And I didn't know what that meant for my future. I didn't know if I would get remarried or, what that would bring. And it was a really intense internal battle I had to go through for, I would say, several months to a year. and I didn't know what to do for the best. I was an absolute emotional wreck during that time, and it was affecting all of my friendships. I even was about to lose my job because of it. I think as my husband shared kind of similarly during his divorce, it takes a real toll on you mentally, emotionally, physically. And I knew something had to change. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to make a decision. So actually my mom gave me this incredible advice. So I don't know if any of you have lived in a big city, you know you have very little privacy. There's very little quiet spaces. And I felt like my inside narrative was so chaotic, and my life was crumbling around me, it felt like. So my mom gave me this advice. So churches typically during the day are empty. And in Paris, there's lots of cathedrals you can just walk into during the day and pray and find silence and solitude. So I went into a cathedral for 3 straight days after work. I was sobbing and praying to God and just hoping nobody noticed me in the cathedral because there were only like 2 other people. But just sitting in the corner, just, trying to figure this out and spending hours there, just not wanting to go home and trying to reconcile this with God. And like so many of us, I think, I asked God, what do I do? Please give me the answer because I don't want to make the decision. This is too hard. And so for 2 straight days, God said nothing. There was silence. And I was really disappointed in that. But on the 3rd day, I was sitting there. I felt like I couldn't say anything more. I couldn't pray anymore. I had nothing left. And I'd offered everything up, all my options of staying or of leaving. And what God responded to me was, I will take care of you. You will be okay. So it wasn't a direct answer to my question. God doesn't tell us what to do, or at least not to me. I don't know, maybe some people have a direct line, but I tend to get the answer I wasn't expecting. And at the time, I felt a little disappointed by that answer because I wanted to be told what to do and just follow and find comfort in that. But what I realized was that God was right there with me, that I wasn't alone, and that God cared about me personally as a daughter. And when I finally made the decision to leave that relationship, which is ultimately what I decided after a lot more prayer and consultation with my family and friends and people I trusted, it was a complete surrender into God's hands, which quite honestly was terrifying. Because I had no idea what my future would bring, and if I would get remarried, I didn't know what would happen from that point on. And that was a huge shift in my life to where I'd always tried to control and tried to create my perfect path. But my plans got derailed, and it was my decision to own. And what I didn't realize at the time was that God was putting his trust in me, actually, that I could still make a bright future beyond this. So let's read a quote from Reverend Moon, our co-founder. What kind of being is God? Who has created heaven and earth? He is a being of utmost goodness, the fundamental root of all things, and the subject partner of love. This is why, after creating all things in heaven and earth, God wanted to give all the precious things in the universe to human beings. If there's someone God can truly trust, love, and entrust things to, he will want to hand over to him all of the most precious things. So this quote by Reverend Moon really encapsulates what I felt that day in that cathedral when God spoke to me. I felt that goodness of God. I didn't feel judgment. I didn't feel pain. I felt goodness. As I laid out my soul, actually, to her, So in our movement, we think of God as a heavenly parent, a heavenly mother and father, of having both feminine and masculine qualities. And I realized at that time that I was speaking to Mother God, and that she was comforting me and embracing me. And that's all she could do at the time, because ultimately she couldn't make the decision for me. But that's a topic for another sermon. Because, at the time, all I could see was pain and darkness. I saw no light. I didn't see a future for myself. And this next verse actually precisely describes what happened that day in that cathedral. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. I put my request before God, but I still felt anxious. That makes it sound so easy, but and for many years to come, I felt anxious, but I could always go back to that moment. And I could feel confident in that moment and trust in God when I was losing faith and when I was losing hope. I could hold on to that belief. And as my husband will tell you, I am still working on not being anxious, especially on the ski slopes. Any new skiers can, I think, identify. So, yeah, still a work in progress. So my journey since that marriage ended in 2016, so about 6 years, has been an intense, and when I say intense, I can't emphasize that word enough, exercise in letting go, both of my past and of the future I thought I would have, because I'd given up so much for that relationship and for that time in my life. But what I was realizing, and kind of what gave me the confidence to leave that relationship, is that I'd gained an incredible sense of self-worth, because I was coming to know who I was as God's daughter, not in relation to someone else, but to myself, and that my value lied in my relationship with God. Now let's read from Psalms. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. So I love this verse because it expresses what I learned at that time. To love and appreciate myself in God's eyes, but almost just as importantly in my own eyes. And that letting go, it was letting go of a lot of different things. It was letting go of my negative self-image, my low self-esteem, my self-pity. It let go of being a victim because it felt good for a time, and letting my past no longer have any emotional control over me. It also took allowing the positives really to sink in, the positives of how my friends and my family saw me, and to let that have power within me and to fill me with grace, that I was still good, that I could still be a daughter of God and still grow in my faith and in my life. And one of the most difficult ones was letting go of pride. I don't know if anybody can relate with that, but it was admitting that I had a part in the failure of that marriage. And I think still sometimes I'm working on that part. So, on to happier times now. So after about 1.5 years of healing, so I'd moved back to the US. I was living in France at the time and moved back in with my family, who were incredibly supportive and just wanted me to heal and take time and not feel pressured to move on too quickly. But after about 1.5 years and a lot of, again, intense work and learning experiences, I decided that I did want to find someone. and I'm wanting to move forward in my life and get remarried and receive the marriage blessing again. So for a little bit of context, I mentioned before the matchmaking, and I don't know if anybody's watched the Jewish matchmaking or the Indian matchmaking. I know they're like with a bunch of rich people, but it's kind of, there's some similar principles, where it's intentional. But yeah, a lot of matchmaking in our church happens through the grapevine, like an auntie gives you a suggestion, and then, you follow up and that kind of thing. And most people would consider it a traditional courtship. Yeah. So I worked with my parents, some advisors. I was working with a coach at the time to give me, for emotional and sort of, some general world guidance, not just about this area. And through many years, many years of searching for a partner, and I experienced disappointment, frustration, and hopelessness. A lot of hopelessness. And went through many different conversations with different men that didn't work out. And so there was this pivotal moment. This was a few years ago, I think right before COVID. There was a point where I was trying so hard to control this situation. I was like, I'm going to will this into being, God. You're going to see how hard I'm working, and you're going to make it happen on my timing, which of course, never works. So I was attempting to reach out to somebody who I thought would be, a good potential partner, a good match. I liked the look of him, not just the look, but who he was. But he was being completely unresponsive, could not get a hold of this guy. And so I was badgering a close friend to help me out, to get in touch with him, because I knew she knew someone who could get in touch with him, who might be able to convince him to get in touch with me. And, I wanted to see if he was alive and breathing, because to me, it didn't seem like he was, because why wouldn't he answer? But that friend apparently was getting so fed up with me. But she's also a person of faith, and, called me up one day. She's also my boss, so was also a close friend. And what she said to me is, you need to let go and let God. And she said it to me probably 20 times during that conversation. What she was getting at is that I needed to trust God for my life and for the life I couldn't even imagine. That you need to trust that He has a bigger vision for your life. I found that extremely confronting. I was like, how dare she not want me to control this? Yeah. But after sitting with it for a few days, it became my mantra. And I even put it on one of those cute little letter boards, so I could see it every single day for probably 2 years. I had it up there, or about a year and a half. And, lessons take a long time for me to sink in for me. I don't know about everybody else, but pretty hard-headed, so... But it started to kind of dawn on me that I really needed to surrender. And what I didn't realize at the time, because hindsight's 20/20, was that all of those matching processes, all of those conversations that didn't work, that I was disappointed by, they were preparing me for my future husband and for our unique situation, our unique family. So God was telling me, no, really, let go. So when a friend suggested Chris to me, she'd actually been in a he's sitting right there. She'd actually been in a process with him, in a matching process. I think short-lived, but they'd talked. And my immediate reaction, because I hadn't learned the lesson yet, right? Was that, nope, that's too complicated. Thank you very much. Can't handle that. Moving on. And also because I was like, well, if he didn't want you and you're amazing, then, why would I want him? Anyway, he knows this story. So concepts, right? And the biggest thing was that I wasn't open to someone who had kids from a previous marriage. And my biggest fear going into that was the unknown of being a step parent and of navigating a blended family, because I had no experience with it. I had no close relationships with people, especially people my age who had experienced that, and it was completely out of left field for me. But God doesn't give up, and yet again, another friend suggested him to me. And I was like, okay, I can't ignore that, that's too much of it. Because we have no kind of mutual network, actually, my husband and I before. And so it just seemed like, okay, all right, I'll consider this. And I sought counsel from my parents, who were incredible and reassured me that his kids would be our family, no question. Like that there was no question that our family could support me and that we could make this work. So it gave me confidence to reach out. And guess what? He was already in a process with someone else. So yet again, I felt disappointed and hopeless and like, oh, okay, now I have to move on and try someone else. But after yet another process didn't work between when we finally met, I was fed up. And I told God, I am ready. You better bring him to me now. I'm ready to meet the person you prepared for me. And I think what God was waiting for was for me to have confidence that I knew my worth, that I knew who I was and who I could be to my partner. So I knew Chris lived in Colorado. I don't know anybody in Colorado, but I had a friend who knew the name of the pastor out there, and that pastor happened to be Pastor Adonia. And I reached out to her that night. I was very bold about Chris and asked her to introduce me to him. And I declared what I was looking for, very short message, and asked if he was interested. And my expectations were at that point, because again, I'd reached this point of confidence to where if it was a no, that's okay. If it was a yes, even better. And within about, within about 2 days, we connected by text. He was dying of COVID, which I didn't know at the time. He had pneumonia. And actually, our first Zoom call, Diverge, was during a Divine Principle workshop, and he gave me a lecture about Jacob or something for about an hour, but that was fun. So always give the guy a second call, all right? Yeah. But after about 3 weeks of talking, we've decided to follow what's called the 21-day communication, where there's kind of no pressure, you just talk. I knew this was something different. And I knew that there was something there. Because our values aligned, he was enthusiastic about who I was, and I could be my whole and true self without feeling judgment or without feeling uncomfortable, but even more feeling appreciated. And I felt like this was God-led. I mean, like, he came to visit me in Alabama, and literal dolphins were jumping out of the water. It's like it felt like nature showed up because they were so happy we found each other. And that was my interpretation. But anyway, I'd never once seen a dolphin in that bay. So, but also another funny story is this picture Chris posted on Facebook before I had quite decided to let people know something was happening. And needless to say, I got a lot of awkward messages from friends and acquaintances who were like, who is this guy? I don't want to assume anything, but we had different philosophies about when to announce, but it all worked out. Yeah. He made very subtle posts about my heart is on fire. Anyway, I won't get into too much. With sunsets, yeah, it was very nice. He embarrassed me last time. I get to embarrass him a little bit, but. And so the point I want to make, it's all very sweet, and it was a pretty quick courtship, but at that point we'd both been searching for a while, knew what we wanted, and we moved forward from there, trusting that we could make it work. But the point is that if I had not let go of this narrow concept of what I expected of my life and what I expected of my future, of my husband, then I would have never been open to being led to Chris. I had so many concepts, so many blocks, so much trying to control exactly this narrow viewpoint that I would have never found someone who's so loving, who's such a good partner. He's sincere, he's kind, he loves his family, he loves his faith community, and he loves God. And he also loves me, which is nice. And I'm saying all this because it was his birthday yesterday, so I have to be nice. So we were blessed in marriage in our church tradition, actually in Alabama, and his kids and my family could be there, which was really during COVID. Normally we had these big mass weddings in Korea, but because of COVID, that was very limited, and we had to have satellite ceremonies, kind of these smaller ceremonies. But it's very intimate and wonderful. And yes, our blended family is just as or even more complicated than I could imagine or was prepared for. And it's challenging, but our marriage is not challenging. And God's vision for my life was so much richer than I could ever imagine. And I'm so grateful that I let go and I let God. So what I want to leave you with is a little invitation. I want you to look at your own life and see where you might be resisting to let go of control. I want you to offer up your concerns, your hopes to God, and see where God is inspiring you to go. Are there areas in your life where you're resisting letting God in? Are there things in your life where you need a solution? But maybe you haven't considered that God has a solution you weren't expecting, or one that you're resisting or afraid of. What areas of your life are you afraid of change? And have you considered that maybe God will be able to work through that change? So I hope my story has been somewhat thought-provoking and that it'll help you along with your journey of letting go and letting God. Thank you. All right, please join me in prayer. Thank you, Heavenly Parent, for this beautiful sunny day after so many days of haze. We're grateful that GPA can be here and fill up our congregation. But we hope, Heavenly Parent, that we can receive this message and really internalize surrendering, along with our own vision, but really surrendering to the bigger vision you have for our lives and trusting that it's there to make us happy and whole and richer. And we know you have an incredible future for every single person here, and one that maybe they can't see right now, but that if they're open to it and seeking your guidance and seeking your perspective, that they can find it. And we're so grateful for this community, and I thank you for everybody here. And I report this in my name, Sungmi Holdhus, of a Blessed Central Couple. Aju, Amen.